everybody. Welcome to this episode of Couch Conversations. I'm Diana Van Blaricom, your Vice President of ERP Strategy here at ROI Healthcare Solutions. And joining me on the couch today is Seth Remetch. Hey, Seth.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Seth is one of our consultants on our awesome supply chain team. And today we're going to have a conversation around contract management versus a good old PO25. So first of all, for everybody joining us, Seth, can you give a little bit of an explanation on what PO25 is exactly and maybe a little bit about what it does?
Sure. PO25 is essentially the management or pricing vehicle, if you will, for version 10 and before. For Infor and Lawson. So PO25 also contains your pricing and the defaultability with your vendor item number and your item master number located for a specific vendor and vendor agreement so that it can default onto the requisitions and then also onto the purchase orders.
So if we're trying to control spend and we want to keep an eye on what we're buying, this is kind of the central brain where we make all the controls, right?
Yes, that's correct. And you can also have a priority. So if you have two different vendors that have the same item, such as a manufacturer or a distributor, and you want to have once they request the item and want to put it onto a PO, you can have the priority set on PO25 to where it's going to take a certain vendor over another vendor so that it at least can somewhat control where that spend is going to. You might want to get the item from a distributor versus a manufacturer, but it might be available from both. One of the ways to default that is to have a higher priority set in PO25.
Perfect. So could you give us a few pointers, tips, tricks around best practices for maintaining these vendor agreements? Maybe talk a little bit about, some folks who have been on version 10 for a while. What can they do to kind of, I don't know if it's clean it up, make sure everything's, in proper functioning order and we clean up any old records. Are there some best practices around maintaining PO25?
For starters, I think one of the best practices you can do is, since a lot of them are not regulated as much as if you're using a contract management system, such as the contract management module in Cloud Suite, a lot of it can create duplicates in PO25. And so one of the things I always recommend is definitely, export those out, the agreements out, compare any duplicates, and see if you have any items that are doubled. You may have one that's on a quote that was left over from when you actually built a contract, and you just never placed that quote on hold. And so what that can do is there's a possibility that a requester out there may have the ability to switch vendors. And then next thing you know that they're using the actual quoted price instead of the preferred contracted price. So the spend's going to an incorrect vendor. And that can affect a lot of things, such as maybe you're trying to build up sales for rebates, things that happen in the backside. Your shipping and freight costs might be different from another vendor. So there's a lot of things that, especially as a requester or a buyer, may not know that there's some things going on in the behind the scenes and why certain agreements want to be used over other agreements. And so that's one thing that I really recommend is when you're going through and updating pricing, to verify to make sure that there is only that one agreement, or if there are multiple agreements, you have it regulated based on who should be preferred. And once again, that kind of comes along with priorities, and then that can carry over to the actual replenishment settings in some other sections. So there's some ways that you can regulate it, but just to keep track of what items are on what agreements, comparing those two agreements or three agreements, depending on what you have, would be one of the best and first steps that you'd want to do when you're going to update any of the contract information on those agreements.
And that's something that people could do now, should be doing some kind of a practice in place, right, before they move to Cloud Suite?
Yes, definitely. Because you don't want to bring, especially if you're going to be moving over to Cloud Suite, you don't want to be bringing over items that are on agreements, or even if you have them listed as quotes. You don't want to have those items brought over when they're actually not on an agreement, because that's just information that you don't want them actually ordering from that vendor or utilizing that agreement. And so with contract management, what you have is, if you do have Landmark, and in some cases, some systems use Landmark, which is kind of the contract management prior to FSM and Cloud Suite. So they actually can close out any quotes or even close out PO25 and start utilizing contract management ahead of that, if they have that ability. But any duplicates that you have, duplicates are not good in any system. And especially if you're transitioning from an already established system to a brand new, I'll say, pristine environment, you don't want to carry over that old information that technically is not good at this point in time. So it's definitely helpful, especially before you transition to, say, Cloud Suite, if you're going to go there, to have PO25 cleaned up in the manner that you know what's going to actually be coming over, so that you can map those over cleanly.
And before you convert, right?
Yes, preferably, yes. You don't want the non-converted stuff moved over and then have to clean up your brand new system. Not recommended.
Not recommended. Perfect. So we talked a little bit about PO25, and you kind of alluded to that kind of interim Landmark version of contract management. But can you speak a little bit to Infor's Cloud Suite contract management piece of it? And there's a couple pieces there, right? There's the basic contract management stuff, and then you can do the full on, managing all the legal contracts. But for an organization that's looking to move into the cloud, get everything up into that multi-tenant instance, can you talk a little bit about that progression and the different pieces of contract management, maybe why it's better?
Sure. In my eyes, I think they made a very good and positive move when they went to Cloud Suite. There are some updates based on a big change from just PO25, but even from Landmark, there are numerous changes. From what I've seen working in Cloud Suite, they're all positive changes. They allow a little bit more control and visibility to all the users, and the systems communicate. It's a constant, immediate change, as opposed to maybe even having to do an interface into what would be the S3 side of Lawson. So the biggest benefit that I would say with contract management would be, and this would affect everybody in all the modules that they have, is that you would no longer have to create an IC11 record for like a non-stock or special item, because contract management can maintain that info for you. And then it can also interface that item information with your clinical system. So it's very nice, because you're managing the contract line and getting that information from the contract and the supplier. But that's all you have to do is manage that contract line. You don't have an item master section that you have to do just to create an item for something that may be used once a year, especially, or even twice a year. So it makes it a lot more simplified, because what's neat about that is once you put it on the contract line, you can add what defaults you want to use for that vendor. You can add the priorities, just like I had mentioned in PO25. And so what that does is that'll take all that pricing and all that item information. And when you have a requester who wants to place an order for that item, not only will that item pop up showing that it's on a contract, but it will also default all that information onto the requisition. So that's what makes it really nice, is you're not only saving the requester from having to type in all the information, and in some cases on specials, it gets kind of scary, because you have some requesters who might put in bone screw. Well, the description on the contract is going to be a lot better than that, because you have people who are ordering a special that they just want to get the item. That's their job, right? So it's nice to have all that information kind of defaulted in there. And then what's neat is once that default's in there, it can flow through the system onto POs faster and easier, and to the correct vendor. And then once that's completed, all that spend goes against that contract. And so you really can limit the free market spending, I guess you could say, of requesters who prefer to use one vendor over another, not understanding that you may be getting some rebate benefits or some freight shipping benefits from using the preferred default vendor. So with those items, you not only get the defaults for the requesters, but you get that analytics ability for that spend on contract. And you get to go back and look at that. And so that really helps with setting up contracts, because maybe that spend gets used enough that in contract management, they'll run reports. And the item master teams will be able to see if that spend is at a certain level and they're supposed to be able to utilize that item, then they can know to build an item master item for it. But if it's only ordered once a year or maybe even twice a year, and there's no need to build an item master item, they can still utilize that contract and get that tracking usage. To me, that's the number one factor of contract management, is the special ability to be able to utilize non-stock and special items with the agreements. Because in PO25, you have to create an item master number for it to go over into that. You may lose some of that spend on people using special items, just filling in, every location or every hospital, whoever the requester is, may put in a different description, may order it in a different way. And so the contract management really kind of limits, and it also notifies the requester if that item exists on the contract or not.
Wow, that's great. So, there's going to be some initial setup, I think, from what I'm hearing, right? But I do think that it's important for people to understand that it's totally worth the investment, right? So spend a little time on your implementation, make sure that you're setting up all the defaulting and all of your rules. And then you get all of this automation and defaulting that happens, which is really about saving time and about saving money, right? Because time is money. So a couple things that I heard from you, Seth, is number one, start with clean data. So do what you can right now to kind of clean up your data, make sure that you get rid of all the old garbage, so that when you do your conversion, you're coming in clean. You're going to have this integration to the clinical systems when you get to the new world of Cloud Suite. That's also going to be helpful. And we talked a little bit about automation and defaulting, which I think, definitely from an end user perspective is going to be key, because they're going to be able to do things not only better and faster, but more correctly, because we're defaulting things, right? So I think there's a lot of huge benefits that you mentioned for folks to make that leap to Cloud Suite. So with that, I would like to thank you for joining us today. I know that was a lot of information around contract management, but really good stuff. And for anybody who out there who is, thinking about making the leap, if you want to explore it a little bit further, you can certainly set up a call with our team, and we'll be happy to have that conversation. So, Seth, thanks again for joining us on the couch today. We'll see you next time.